All right, so you want to dive into this climate change and its consequences thing you sent over?
Yeah, it's a pretty comprehensive document. You mentioned wanting like a clear picture of the science, right? And how it affects us directly.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like we hear climate change everywhere, but it's good to, go beyond the headlines sometimes.
Totally. And I think this document does a good job at, well, connecting the dots.
Right.
Like it gets into the why, the science behind it all, but it also tackles the so what. What does it actually mean for us? What are the consequences we're seeing right now?
Which is what I'm really interested in. So to start, maybe we can clarify something. When we talk about climate change, we're not just talking about like the weather being a bit wheeled, right?
Right, exactly. It's bigger than that. It's not just about day-to-day fluctuations. It's about these long-term shifts in temperature, rainfall patterns, even wind patterns, and these changes can last for generations.
Wow, okay, so generations, that's huge.
It is, and the document makes it clear these changes, particularly warming, they're happening much faster than anything we've seen in human history. And the kicker is, we're the primary drivers, especially since the Industrial Revolution.
That's a sobering thought. So what are we doing that's throwing things so out of whack?
Well, the document digs into a lot of factors. Fossil fuels are a big one.
Yeah, it makes sense. They power pretty much everything.
Right, it's like this double-edged sword, right? Modern life kind of depends on them. But burning these fuels, coal, oil, natural gas, releases a ton of carbon dioxide.
Which is a major greenhouse gas.
Exactly. And it's our cars, electricity, even our gadgets, they all contribute.
And it's not just about what we're burning, is it? The document also mentions deforestation. I was actually surprised by how much emphasis was put on that.
Yeah, it's often overlooked, but it's huge. Like, take the Amazon rainforest, right? We're cutting down trees faster than they can grow back. And those trees, they act like this natural carbon capture system.
It's like they suck the CO2 out of the air for us.
Precisely. So when we clear forests for agriculture, development, whatever, we release all that stored carbon right back into the atmosphere.
It's like we're dismantling the planet's air purifiers ourselves.
Pretty much.
And the kicker is, even our food system is part of the problem.
If you're enjoying this podcast, don't forget to like the video. Share it with friends who might find it helpful. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next video. Let us know in the comments what topic you'd like to hear.
I was amazed by how much livestock and fertilizer impacts the climate. Like, who knew?
Yeah, it's another one that often gets missed. But the impact is significant. Livestock, especially cattle, they produce a lot of methane.
Which is another greenhouse gas.
Right. And then there's the fertilizers, especially nitrogen-based ones. They release nitrous oxide as they break down another greenhouse gas.
It's crazy how it all adds up. So every burger is basically a blow to the atmosphere.
In a nutshell, yeah. And if you thought the list ended there, think again. The document even calls out industrial processes.
Honestly, I wouldn't have thought of that. Like, what specifically?
Well, cement production, for example. It actually releases a surprising amount of greenhouse gases. And then you've got plastic production, certain chemical processes. It really highlights how almost every part of our modern lives is somehow intertwined with climate change.
It's kind of overwhelming when you think about it like that. But, okay, so we're doing all this stuff, releasing all these gases, but how does it actually lead to a warmer planet? The document keeps mentioning this thing called the greenhouse effect.
Right, so imagine the Earth is like a giant greenhouse.
Okay, I'm picturing it. Glass walls, sun streaming in.
Exactly. So the sun's energy, right, it reaches the Earth.
Yeah.
Some of that energy escapes back into space, but certain gases in our atmosphere, like that carbon dioxide we talked about,
Yeah.
they trap some of that heat, just like the glass walls of a greenhouse.
Makes sense.
Now, a natural amount of this effect is actually good. It's what keeps Earth habitable.
Right, otherwise it'd be freezing.
Exactly. But we're pumping out so many extra greenhouse gases, it's like we're wrapping an extra blanket around the Earth. We're trapping too much heat, and the planet is warming up way too quickly.
And we're feeling the effects already. It's not just some far-off thing, right? Like, the document talks about rising global temperatures, more intense heat waves.
Oh, absolutely. We're seeing hotter summers, milder winters. Those heat waves are sticking around longer, happening more often.
Yeah, even this past summer.
Exactly. And it's not just about feeling hot and uncomfortable. These extreme temperatures, they have serious consequences for ecosystems and human health, which the document goes into in detail.
Yeah, speaking of ecosystems, the picture the document paints is pretty grim. Like coral bleaching, messed up migration patterns. It's like nature's trying to send us an SOS.
Yeah, it's definitely a cause for concern. Take coral reefs, for example. They're incredibly sensitive to even small changes in water temperature.
Really? I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. So, as the ocean absorbs that excess heat from the atmosphere, it leads to coral bleaching. The coral essentially gets starved, becomes more susceptible to disease.
So what did that look like?
Imagine a vibrant, colorful underwater city, teeming with life. Now picture that same city bleached white, deserted, lifeless. That's the reality of coral bleaching.
That's awful.
It is. And what's really concerning is that the document suggests this is just the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. We also have to talk about rising sea levels.
Yeah, that's one of those things that's scary to think about, like especially for people living on the coasts.
It is a major concern, and it's directly linked to those rising temperatures. As the planet warms, glaciers and ice sheets melt at alarming rates. All that melted ice flows into the ocean, causing sea levels to rise.
And we're already seeing the effects of that, right? More coastal erosion, more frequent and intense flooding.
Exactly. And the document doesn't shy away from the urgency of this. This isn't some distant future threat. It mentions several cities, like Miami, that are projected to see a sea level rise of up to 2 feet by 2050.
Wow, 2050, that's not that far off.
Not at all. And that kind of rise could displace millions of people, submerge critical infrastructure, cause billions, if not trillions, in damage. It really drives home the point that climate change isn't just an environmental issue, it's a human issue with very real consequences. And coastal cities are just one piece of the puzzle, unfortunately.
Right. It's not just about the sea levels rising either. The document also talks about how extreme weather events are becoming more, extreme.
Definitely. And more frequent. It's like the weather's having a temper tantrum.
And we're the ones left cleaning up the mess.
Exactly. We're talking stronger hurricanes, longer droughts, heavier rainfall that leads to flooding, and then wildfires that just rage out of control. Climate change is basically turning up the dial on all these extreme weather events.
It's like it's making them even more destructive. And the document has some pretty stark examples of this. Hurricanes in particular, it feels like every year there's a new one that's stronger than the last.
You're right. It's not just our imagination. They are getting stronger. And it's directly linked to climate change. Warmer ocean temperatures, they act like fuel for these storms. They intensify wind speeds, increase rainfall.
Right. It's like that hurricane a couple years back. It was crazy, just unbelievable amounts of rain.
Exactly. And the document brings up how Hurricane Harvey back in 2017, the one that hit Texas really hard, that was a prime example. It dumped a record amount of rain, and they linked that directly to warmer than usual Gulf waters.
It's like watching these global changes play out right in front of us. And it's not just hurricanes either. The document also links climate change to droughts. Some of them are lasting way longer than they used to and hitting much harder.
Yeah, droughts are becoming a major concern. We often think of them as just dry spells, but they lead to all sorts of problems. Water shortages, crop failures, which then leads to food insecurity. Entire communities and ecosystems are affected.
It really highlights how climate change is impacting these essential resources that we often take for granted.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the document uses the ongoing drought in the southwestern U.S. as an example.
Yeah.
It's a prime example of how climate change just makes existing stresses on water resources even worse.
And it's not just about having enough water to drink, right? It affects agriculture, urban areas, everything.
Exactly. It's all connected. And as if hurricanes and droughts weren't enough, the document also brings up wildfires. Those images of the fires raging across California, Australia, even the Amazon. They're hard to forget.
It's almost like we've gotten used to seeing those images, which is a scary thought in itself.
It is scary, and it's becoming more and more common. Climate change is creating these drier conditions, which makes forests more susceptible to catching fire.
And more flammable too, right?
Exactly. And it creates this vicious cycle because those mega fires, they release enormous amounts of carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere, which of course just fuels more warming and more fire.
It's like we're trapped in this loop of cause and effect. It seems like one problem just leads to another. And speaking of problems, the document throws another one at us: ocean acidification. And honestly, I'm not even sure what that is exactly.
It's one of those lesser known consequences, but it's a big one. Remember how we were talking about the ocean absorbing all that extra carbon dioxide from the atmosphere?
Right, like it's doing us a favor.
Well, it turns out there's a downside to that absorption. As the ocean absorbs more CO2, the pH of the water actually changes. It becomes more acidic.
Okay, so more CO2, more acidic ocean. But what does that actually mean for, life in the ocean?
Imagine you're trying to build a house, right? But the bricks you're using are slowly dissolving.
That's not good for the house.
Not good at all. And that's kind of what's happening with ocean acidification. It affects marine organisms, especially those with shells and skeletons, corals, oysters, even some types of plankton.
So how does it affect them?
If you're enjoying this podcast, don't forget to like the video. Share it with friends who might find it helpful. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next video. Let us know in the comments what topic you'd like to hear.
Well, it basically messes with their ability to build and maintain those shells and skeletons. It makes them weaker, more vulnerable.
That's a disturbing thought. And I'm guessing it's not just those specific species that are affected, right? The document mentions something about a domino effect on the entire ocean food web.
You're exactly right. Think about it. Those shell-building organisms, they're crucial parts of the food chain. If their populations start to decline, it disrupts the balance of the whole ecosystem. Fish that rely on those smaller organisms for food, they start to suffer.
Yeah.
And it goes all the way up the chain.
So it could even impact us eventually.
Exactly. It could affect fisheries, the livelihoods of people who depend on the ocean for their livelihoods. The impacts are far-reaching.
It's mind-blowing how interconnected everything is. It really drives home the point that climate change affects literally everything on the planet. Speaking of which, the document also spends a good amount of time talking about biodiversity loss.
Yeah, that's a big one. And it's often overshadowed by some of these other consequences we've been talking about.
Right, and sometimes it feels a bit abstract, like why should we care about losing a species of beetle in the Amazon, for example?
It's a valid question.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Biodiversity is like this intricate web. Every species, even that tiny beetle, plays a role. They might be pollinators, decomposers, a food source for other animals. We might not even fully understand their role until they're gone.
And then it's too late.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Losing even one species can create a ripple effect throughout the entire ecosystem. And the document emphasizes that climate change is one of the biggest drivers of biodiversity loss.
Because it's changing habitats, messing with migration patterns.
Exactly. It's like it's changing the rules of the game. And a lot of species just can't adapt fast enough. And the document doesn't just stop at environmental impacts either. It also goes into the consequences for human health.
Right, because climate change isn't just some abstract threat. It's a very real threat to our well-being.
Exactly. And the document highlights how it acts as this threat multiplier. It makes existing health issues worse and creates new ones. For example, heat-related illnesses. Those are becoming more and more common if temperatures rise.
Which makes sense. We're already seeing more extreme heat.
Exactly. And then there's the spread of infectious diseases, things like malaria, dengue fever. As temperatures get warmer, these diseases can actually expand their range.
Wow, I hadn't even thought about that.
It's something we need to be prepared for. And on top of that, we also have to think about air quality. Climate change often worsens air pollution, which of course can cause respiratory problems.
So it's like we're facing all these interconnected health crises on top of everything else.
It's a lot to take in, and it can feel overwhelming, for sure. But here's the thing. The document doesn't just leave us with a sense of doom and gloom. It actually emphasizes that there are things we can do. We have agency, our actions matter, and it's not too late to create a better future.
Okay, so let's talk about solutions. If climate change is mainly caused by human activity, then we should be able to do something to mitigate it, right?
Exactly. The document outlines two main approaches: mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation is all about reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. It's about turning off the tap on all that pollution that's causing the problem in the first place.
So things like transitioning to renewable energy, solar, wind power, the document talks about those a lot.
Exactly. Think about solar panels on rooftops, wind farms harnessing the power of the wind, geothermal plants tapping into the Earth's heat. We have the technology to make a difference. It's about shifting away from fossil fuels to cleaner, more sustainable options.
It's about moving away from a system that pollutes and towards one that sustains.
I like how you put that. And it's not just about energy, of course. The document also emphasizes the importance of sustainable agriculture.
Right, which we talked about earlier. Less methane from livestock, fewer harmful fertilizers.
Exactly. There's so many ways we can make our food systems more climate friendly. And we can't forget about deforestation. Protecting existing forests and planting new trees, that's crucial for absorbing carbon dioxide.
So mitigation is about reducing our impact. But what about adaptation? What does that look like?
Adaptation is about being proactive and resilient. We know that some climate change impacts are unavoidable at this point, so we need to adapt.
So it's less about trying to stop climate change completely I mean, that feels like a bit of a pipe dream at this point, and more about learning to live with it.
In a way, yes. It's about being realistic about the changes that are already happening and figuring out how we can adapt our infrastructure, agriculture, even our healthcare systems to be more resilient.
So less about hitting the brakes and more about, like, adjusting the steering wheel.
I like that analogy. And there's so many ways we can do this. Think about coastal cities, for example. Building seawalls, restoring those natural barriers like mangroves. Those can help protect against rising sea levels and those increasingly intense storms.
Right, like we're giving those communities a fighting chance.
If you're enjoying this podcast, don't forget to like the video. Share it with friends who might find it helpful. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next video. Let us know in the comments what topic you'd like to hear.
Exactly. And in areas dealing with more and more droughts, we need to get smarter about our water usage, investing in water-efficient irrigation, developing crops that can handle those drier conditions. Those are key.
So using innovation and technology to basically prepare for a future where climate change is just like a fact of life.
Exactly. And it's not just about the physical stuff either. We need social adaptation too. Things like early warning systems for heat waves, community-based disaster preparedness.
We have to be ready for anything.
It's incredible, really, how many different areas are involved in tackling this. Like, it's not just an environmental problem, it's a human problem.
Absolutely. It requires a multifaceted approach, for sure. But here's the good news. This document doesn't just leave us with a sense of doom. It reminds us that we still have a say in this, our actions really do matter, and there's still time to change course. That's a message I think we all need to hear right now. It's easy to get overwhelmed, but it's important to remember that even small changes can make a difference.
100%. Whether it's cutting down our own carbon footprints, pushing for policy changes, or even just supporting businesses that prioritize sustainability, every step counts.
It's about realizing we're not just passive bystanders in all of this. We can be active participants in creating solutions.
Exactly. Knowledge is power. Now that we understand the science, the consequences, and the potential solutions, we're empowered to make informed choices that contribute to a more sustainable future.
I love that. So to wrap things up, we've covered a lot in this deep dive. We talked about the greenhouse effect, ocean acidification, those devastating wildfires, the importance of biodiversity. It's a lot to process. But the most important takeaway is that we're not powerless in all of this. We have the power to make a difference.
I couldn't agree more. Climate change is a challenge, yes, but it's not insurmountable. By understanding the science and taking action, we can create a healthier, more sustainable planet for ourselves and future generations.
Beautifully said. And on that note of hope and action, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Just remember, you're not just listening, you're learning. You're becoming a part of the solution. So what action will you take today to make a difference?